Chapter 29. Meiling stood in a misty forest of pine trees. She wore coarse trousers and a loose linen tunic. Pine needles cushioned and pricked her bare feet. Just beyond the clearing, she could make out the outline of a man. Not tall, but watchful. Strong, imposing. Fei-Yen's father. She was familiar with this mind. She'd explored it before. There was no need to converse with the man hovering on the edge of every one of Fei-Yen's thoughts. Instead, she closed her eyes and reached out with her hands. Immediately, when she touched the spider silk memory threads, she felt the difference. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. She opened her eyes, her hand gripping a thread, and ran deeper into the forest. At first, nothing looked off. It was only an insistent itch in her mind, her intuition filling her senses and telling her that something was not right. But the farther she ran, the more memory threads she touched, and she started to see things. The threads were usually mostly invisible. Only if she touched a thread would it glimmer like the tiniest sliver of a prism refracting the light. But with each step into the forest of Fei-Yen's mind, they started gleaming black. Slowly, they were more than mere snatches of ebony in the mist, but threads of pure midnight. She could see the weave and weft of the memories, could see how some fell slack, how some were tangled knots on the ground, disconnected from everything. She stopped, surrounded by memories, and realized suddenly that her method of hunting in mines, of searching along the intact memory threads, was useless to find lost memories like the ones glittering around her bare feet, scattered among the grass and pine needles. But that was irrelevant. She tore off again, trying to discover why the threads were so visible, so black. She closed her eyes again, feeling the threads with her hands. That was when she felt it. The humming of the memories. It was discordant, like bad music, but not just played incorrectly. Music played wrongly. It ached in her ears, in her chest, making her furious while simultaneously making her want to weep. The mist grew heavier around her. The change was so subtle she hardly noticed until she slogged through soot-colored smoke. It clung to her spirit limbs, not merely hindering her progress, but trying to haul her back, trying to keep her from penetrating deeper into this mind. Her chest tightened, and Meiling reached out to feel for her tether. The comforting, painful throb of her heartbeat through the tether soothed the fear rising in her throat. This nightmare in Fei-Yen's mind was unquestionably the work of Feng Zedong. The black clinging to the memory threads grew fatter. The smoke started reaching for her face, and she abandoned her physical projection of herself. Becoming little more than smoke herself, she moved faster through the fog, but it still tried to reach out to her and slow her down. She reached a clearing, and balked at what awaited her. It was just like the clearing she always saw when she first entered Fei-Yen's mind. The mist-shrouded pine forest clearing, though no father loomed on the edge. This was different. Oh. This was the hidden, deeper, truer version of the first clearing. Fei-Yen's soul tether was anchored to this second clearing, protected. It was anchored into the soft ground, only 2 steps away from where she stood. Crouched around the green glowing tether that burned with the light of all that was Fei-Yen was something black, almost formless, but not entirely. The clearing was full of thick, dark smoke. The memory threads coalescing here turned to heavy, fat ropes of black, weighted down by sorcery. And in the center, something blinked back at Meiling. Her heart stopped. The black thing blobbed together, becoming more solid. Long legs scuttled in place, and the body of the thing crouched closer to Fei-Yen's tether, jowls clicking, as though it protected its meal. It had no eyes, but it watched her. It was a sentient curse, and it was consuming Fei-Yen, her mind. Meiling's scream died in horror. Her traitorous self-preservation remembered the fox spirit's mind. What risk did she bear by approaching this thing? "What are you doing here?" Meiling asked the curse. It chattered its jowls, but otherwise did not answer. "How can I break you?" It screeched, legs clicking, but it stayed on Fei-Yen's tether. She took a step closer, and the curse screeched again. It sucked more of the surrounding smoke into itself, growing bigger and bigger. It chomped something like a mouth and raised a long arm over its head. It wasn't an arm. It was a tail, with a stinger on the end. The curse. It was a scorpion. A demon scorpion sent from the fieriest layer of DU. That tail darted out toward Meiling, and she barely had time to fly backward as the stinger struck into the ground where she'd been standing. Black poison spread like spidery vines on the ground, crawling outward from the stinger. Pincher struck next, the scorpion continuing to grow and grow until its tail loomed in the misty sky above. Think! How could she defeat such a curse? Such a wicked, evil, dangerous curse. The compulsion threads she'd snapped in the phoenixes were nothing compared to this. All she'd done was scream, and the sound had sundered the magic in two. Meiling opened her mouth and screamed. The scorpion's tail came flying for her, whole and utterly unweakened. She cried out as she flung herself to the side. The tail shook the earth as it struck. Poison seeped deeper into Fei-Yen's mind. Meiling gasped as the tail ripped away, leaving behind it a crater big enough for her to fit into. She scrambled to her feet and ran. That tail kept plunging into the ground near her, uprooting trees in its wake. She'd seen success against black magic with three things: her own screams, other black magic, and... The world tilted and she fell. She fought the pull of the smoke on her limbs, tore against the fear clambering to rule her, and flung herself toward the sky. She had to get out of this mind. She gave one glance back. The cursed scorpion was the size of the palace, crushing Fei-Yen's tether beneath its weight. It towered over trees, its huge pincers snapping trunks like twigs. And that horrible stinger came shooting straight for Meiling. She screamed.
"Meiling! Wake up! Meiling!"
Her eyes flew open to find Shang's face right above hers. His pupils were completely dilated, both his hands clamped over her mouth. She blinked and tried to suck in a gasp of air through her mouth, but only received skin, not oxygen. Panic squeezed her lungs. She flung aside Shang's hands and leaned over the side of the bed, gasping. "Don't vomit on Shang's floor! Don't vomit on Shang's floor!"
"Meiling, what happened? Are you hurt?"
he demanded urgently, grabbing her shoulders to keep her from falling. She'd escaped. She wasn't dead or hurt. The cursed scorpion had not killed her. Her heaving lungs calmed enough for her to roll back onto the bed and close her eyes. Just for a breath. A knock sounded on the door.
"Shang? Are you in there?"
Meiling shot upright, panic on two accounts nearly blinding her. But she launched herself at his arm, ignoring his startled face. "Kiss her!" she gasped. "You must kiss Fei-Yen! Now!" Shang drew back as though she'd struck him.
"I will not kiss her. What are you talking about?"
"The Yanjiao technique! We have no time. It might already be too late. There's a scorpion eating her mind, and it's the size of a mountain, and you've got to kiss her to stop it!" He flexed his hand, set his mouth in a firm, stubborn line, and marched to the door. "Shang!" Meiling cried, fury nearly overcoming every other emotion. He opened the door halfway, reached out, and grabbed hold of the front of someone's robes, and dragged him inside. It was Zhenshu, whose surprised expression shifted to Meiling, then Fei-Yen in confused concern.
"Kiss her,"
Shang demanded, pointing at Fei-Yen.
"Yanjiao. Now."
"Please, Zhenshu," Meiling gasped. "It's an emergency." To his credit, Zhenshu was only stunned immobile for about half a second. Then he crossed the room, taking up Meiling's place at Fei-Yen's side as she scooted away, and planted one hand on the bed beside Fei Yan's head. He hesitated for a heartbeat. Oh, fathers, Meiling thought with the realization of a lightning bolt. She'd forgotten what she found in his mind in Zedong's fortress, that Zhenshu had harbored a secret, unreturned affection for the healer for years. Now she was making him kiss her. He bent and pressed his lips to the healer's. He was careful, gentle, and Meiling quickly looked away, the moment feeling too intimate to watch. At least she hadn't had to watch Shang kiss someone else. He was standing now, turned away from the bed, holding his wrist in the small of his back. She slid to his side, peering up at his hard-as-flint face. His eyes drifted down to hers, his expression softening only just slightly. The rest of his face was stubborn as a mule, as though challenging her to be angry with him that he wouldn't kiss Fei Yan. Fei Yan stirred. Meiling spun around just as Zhenshu straightened and stepped aside, pulling out of the healer's line of vision before she opened her eyes. She tried not to notice the way he seemed eager to avoid her gaze, too. Meiling hurried to take his place at Fei Yan's side. She grabbed the healer's hand and squeezed it hard. Warmth flowed into her fingers. Her shoulders sagged with relief. Fei Yan, can you hear me? Meiling? Fei Yan rasped and blinked her eyes open. Fathers above, they were clear, no longer glazed or distant. It had worked. The curse was banished. Oh, Fei Yan, Meiling gasped, clasping her hand with both of her own. You're safe now. You had a curse in your mind. Fei Yan frowned, wrinkled her nose, and then sat up slowly. No wonder I've been feeling like rubbish recently. A curse? What sort of curse? It seemed like a parasite to me, Meiling said. It was nasty. I couldn't get rid of it. Had to get Zhenshu to kiss you for me. The look that crossed Fei Yan's face was sudden panic mixed with shock. Her mouth opened, and her eyes darted beyond Meiling to find Shang's turned back and Zhenshu facing them, arms crossed as he leaned against the wall. The latter was mostly enveloped in shadow, but he still lifted a hand in greeting and smiled.
I'm sorry it came to that,
said Zhenshu, ducking his head in a nod.
Are you feeling better?
Shang still hadn't turned around. Meiling wanted to elbow him in the ribs. Fei Yan tried to say several things, but could never get past the first syllable. Face pale, she finally shut her mouth, nodded, and closed her eyes, leaning back against the bedframe. Meiling swallowed, glancing between Shang's impenetrable back, Zhenshu's averted attention, and Fei Yan's ashy skin. Her vision swam, and for a moment she thought she was staring up into darkness and shadows as large, cold hands held her face, tilting her head upward for a beautiful, impassioned kiss. Silence was not usually a problem for her, but suddenly she couldn't bear it. She opened her mouth and began chattering like a nervous, clucking hen. When I first saw the curse, I wasn't quite sure what it was. Actually, that wasn't what I saw at first. Did you know your memories are little threads linked throughout your mind? Well, normally they're mostly invisible, but they were black. Very strange. I found your... She cut herself off before she betrayed Fei Yan's hidden soul. Not that either of them would do anything with the knowledge, but it seemed like a private thing. Instead, she prattled. The curse was guarding your tether. I think it was sending its magic out into your mind, but when I attacked, it seemed to pull it back in to make itself bigger and deadlier. The color slowly returned to Fei Yan's cheeks, but she stared up at Meiling like she had a few spare heads atop her shoulders. Shang was silent. Not even the creak of floorboards revealed his presence. Zhenshu, on the other hand, frowned.
I beg your pardon?
Meiling offered a lame, wincing smile. I'm glad you're back, Zhenshu. I was afraid you'd be in the dungeons for a long time after the episode with Liu Xian. And after you'd just been freed. Zhenshu's small, answering smile was genuine.
Thank you, Princess Meiling. I, too, am glad to be back. And apparently just in time.
His attention flicked to Feyen briefly. Enough with the formalities. Where is the rest of this riveting, insane story? Feyen interrupted from the bed, drawing her knees up to her chest. Tell me more about you attacking this parasite. Meiling scratched her neck. Well, I confess I didn't do much attacking. Once it coalesced and I could see what form it took, a scorpion, it kept trying to skewer me with its tail while it mowed down the trees in your mind. It almost got me a few times. I barely made it out, so... She stopped herself before she mentioned the kiss again. As I said, it was a nasty curse. I'm glad it's gone now. When she looked over her shoulder, Shang stared at her in open-mouthed horror. She cocked her head and glanced at Feyen and Zhenshu, and then back at him. What? He clamped his mouth shut and shook his head. Where are we? Feyen asked as she scooted to the edge of the bed. Unless the, scorpion ate my memories, I am pretty sure this is not my room, nor the library, nor the infirmary. Shang said nothing, so Meiling answered, We're in Shang's room. He was so kind to lend it to us when we found you outside and had to carry you somewhere. Feyen seemed to pause slightly, glancing down at the bed, and then got to her feet. Well, you all have buckets full of thanks from me. Will a bow to the mighty ice warrior and feral warrior suffice? She swept one to Zhenshu, which was answered with a cordial nod, and another to Shang's back. And one to you, the gentle and talented princess. Meiling ran forward and embraced her friend as tightly as she could. I am so relieved you're well. Well might be a bit of a stretch, but I'm certainly better. Feyen hugged her back with a squeeze, and it might have been Meiling's imagination that she hung on just a moment longer than expected. You would have been Feyen. Meiling gave one more squeeze, then reluctantly pulled back from her friend. When she did, she found Shang had crossed the room to Zhenshu, and the two men were speaking in low tones to one another.
I was concerned when you left the dance so quickly,
Zhenshu was saying. Shang said something back that was too quiet for Meiling to catch. Care to share with the class? Feyen chirped. Zhenshu's mouth quirked in amusement, while Shang's cool eyes snapped up to Feyen, then slid to Meiling and stayed there. Oh, Meiling said quickly. We'll leave. Sorry for intruding. Thank you for helping us. Shang heaved a quiet sigh, almost as if to say, I wasn't trying to get you to leave. Too late. She'd already spoken her misunderstanding aloud. Yes, we don't want to intrude on the best friends having a moment, drawled Feyen, just before she banged her shin into the corner of Shang's table and swore. Dragons curse it! Zhenshu and Meiling said at the same time, Feyen, are you all right? But Feyen was already waving her hand dismissively, obviously trying to swallow her grimace and paste a grin on top of it. I'm dandy as a peach. Now, Shang, you really should sand down the edges of your table. It's a hazard to guests. When Shang didn't respond, Zhenshu supplied a diplomatic,
I don't believe this is his permanent residence, but I'm sure he will.
Knowing Shang, he'll sharpen the edges of his table to slice into the legs of his enemies. More efficient that way. Meiling winced. She needed to get Feyen and leave.
I won't be inviting my enemies into my home,
said Shang darkly, his brow lowered. Well, this has been wonderful, said Meiling with forced lightness. Thank you, Zhenshu, for the kiss. For Feyen, I mean. And thank you, Shang, for the help. And the room. And good night. With that, she grabbed Feyen's wrist and dragged her out through the door. But before she could pull it shut behind her, a hand caught it. Meiling looked up to find Shang holding the door open, only half his face visible through the crack.
The Crown Prince will be looking for you. Shall I escort you back?
You. Not you and Fei-Yen. Her heart rammed in her throat. If she said yes, would he try to kiss her again? In the darkness on the way back? Or would things be desperately awkward and serious? Somehow, with Fei-Yen standing here, it was like all her thoughts and motives were exposed. She couldn't quite bring herself to say it. "Thank you," she said yet again, "but I think I will make it back just fine." This time, he let her shut the door. Chapter 30. The night was restless. Meiling laid upon her bed, staring up at the canopy overhead. This was the 5th time she'd woken up, and she never woke up once she fell asleep. She was always too busy floating around in the darkness. Yet tonight, her tether kept yanking her back to her body, insistent as a kiss. "I told him no," she whispered into the stillness. She should be thinking about how to defeat Zedong in his own game. She should be thinking about what she would say when she testified at the trial tomorrow. Instead, there was nothing she could do but trace her patterned ceiling and torture herself with questions of whether she'd made the wrong decision. It wasn't too late. She could go to him even now, to his mind, and tell him she wanted to escape with him. They could be married in secret first thing, and then they could escape together. Then she wouldn't have to sleep alone anymore. But every time she tried to imagine taking those steps, uttering those words, she couldn't. Because as much as she wanted it, she couldn't leave. "I told him no," she whispered again, this time with dull resignation. When she fell asleep again for the 100th time, she stayed in her room, floating to the moonlit windowsill. If this was her mind, her soul tether would be anchored right here. She'd found it when Feng Zedong had imprisoned her in her own mind back in his fortress. She trailed a disintegrating finger along the stonework, expecting the grit of the grout between the stones, but feeling nothing. So strange. She stared down, stroking the stone and letting her mind balk at the lack of sensation. A tendril of shadow broke away from her finger. Meiling's gaze sharpened as it didn't evaporate, but instead slid along the stone, over the edge, and out the window, becoming a little blur of black slipping away. What? She melted through the wall without a thought and flew fast, trying to keep up with the black that seemed to grow darker and longer by the moment. What was it? Not part of her. The ground raced for her, but the snaking shadow curved along the wall, racing along the base. She chased after it. It must have a destination, some place it was going. After all the events of today, she wasn't about to let a shred of Zedong's black magic escape her. The closer she got, the louder the hissing grew. She could almost reach out and Meiling stopped, looked around her. She floated at the front entrance of the palace, at the top of 1,000 stairs that flowed down into the city. Su Guan winked at her, bleary-eyed and half asleep. Drunken. The city sprawled so far, she almost couldn't see the sea from here. But there, towering above the rooftops of the city, was the pagoda they'd visited the other day. The stars twinkled and seemed to laugh down at her. The moon was so beautiful tonight, almost full and nearly incandescent, illuminating the curved eaves of the buildings and the far strip of sea. Behind her, guards stood at attention. Their glows mingled with one another, bright with soft, warm with cool. Why in the 7 valleys was she here? She had not aimlessly meandered out here. In fact, she did not think she had been wandering at all. Hadn't she been doing something? Following something? But what would she be following so late at night, if not a person? There was no one here she would have been following. There wasn't a single moving body. Even the guards were still as statues. Bewildered, she floated back the way she thought she'd come. This was just... It was a strange night. That was all. The last parade. Meiling could do it. She'd done so many before, so many this week. She could handle one more. Part of her wanted to gasp in relief. The last parade. The rest of her wanted to explode into a panicked frenzy. The last parade. The festival ended tonight. Shang would likely leave sometime during the night. Today she would testify. And maybe, just maybe, the judge would accept her testimony. Maybe they could get a pardon after all, and Shang wouldn't have to flee for his life. Riding out with her family into the streets of Suguan was rather like a dream. Though her senses were full of the shouting, the overwhelming and conflicting smells of rich and poor, man and beast, and the rocking, jolting movements of her horse, it was like she was a layer removed from it all. She kept her head high and her eyes higher, over the heads of the people. She could not bear to meet their scornful gazes. And then she closed her eyes, just for a moment.
Did I not promise you so much more, little one?
Meiling nearly gasped, but managed to keep her composure even as her eyes burst open. When her heart calmed its sudden thunderous roar, she braced herself and closed her eyes again. The sounds of the parade dimmed.
I will still forgive you and spare your life, if you will join me.
Forgive me? For what? Escaping your murderous clutches? She snapped back. Perhaps I ought to be telling you that I might forgive you, if only you would behave. That raspy chuckle was cut off instantly when she opened her eyes again. Despite how weak her legs had gone, despite the profuse sweat dripping off her hands into the leathery reins she held, she was able to think clearly enough to notice what she hadn't last night. Whatever magic Zedong worked was different from her own. She could block him out simply by keeping her eyes open, which meant he might not be able to hunt in her mind like she had hunted in his. He was still limited. Somewhat. But it was not a good sign that he was still in her mind, even after she was kissed by Shang. Was he coming and going as he pleased? It was the only explanation that made reasonable sense. What was more dangerous, conversing with her enemy, or refusing to listen to any clues he might give her? Any hints about where he was or what he was planning? If she discovered anything of use, no one would listen to her, but she could give the information to Shang. He would know how to get it into the right hands. Where are you? Meiling prompted, closing her eyes.
Have you nothing else to ask me, daughter of Leigh?
Have you anything else to tell me? She retorted back.
My, you have indeed grown fiercer. Or perhaps this was in your mind all along. You only did not voice it. You are more like Leigh than I thought, but also more different.
I wish you would leave me and my people alone. The soft tisking in her mind was louder than the cries and cheers of the people.
My sweet little Meiling, you know I offer salvation to you and your people.
Salvation from what? She spat.
From themselves. Their own weakness. Aren't we all our own worst enemies? You, of all people, should know this, my soft-hearted one.
Meiling's reply sat on her tongue, lethal and fire-laced. It waited patiently, like a crouching tiger. She'd been in his mind. She knew what Feng Zedong feared, what haunted him. But she kept her reply unspoken, caged it away for later. The truth of it burned in her chest. She saw what Ma had seen so many years ago. Saw it better than Ma, perhaps. But Ma had only seen the birth, the potential. She saw the road Feng Zedong had plunged onto. Meiling saw his destination, It was far worse than what her mother had suspected long ago. Meiling still could not be there for the beginning of the trial due to the parade. It gnawed at her every second she rode atop that horse, urged her to walk swifter through the palace, trailed by her relentless maids and guards, toward the courtroom. Her heart was nearly exploding in her chest when she reached the doors, but she drew herself up higher and sucked in a deep breath. The doors opened. Please let this be enough to save them. The judge had this look about him, a mask of lazy indifference, or perhaps more like a bored willingness to hear her out. But behind it, he was ready to pounce. Meiling licked her lips, watching him follow her every movement. He waited for any mistake that could warrant him tossing her out into the hallway. When she strode down the aisle and finally came into view of Shang and Fen, her heart tripped over itself. Fen's brows were raised, but not in mockery. Her face seemed to say, "Let's see what you can do." Shang's eyes were fixed on her, so heavy that she struggled to peel her gaze away to face the judge. It had to be enough to save them. It just had to be. She swore her vows before the judge and the scribe to the right who shuffled his papers and bounced his spectacles. This done, she faced the judge. She willed her knees to strengthen, to not go wobbly on her. Willed her breath to be even, controlled. She could do something. Finally. The judge lifted his nose so he could stare down at her.
"Princess Meiling, no magic."
He seemed to emphasize the last two words.
"You are here to testify to what?"
Her voice did not waver. "I am here to testify to the innocence of Tang Shangdi, Ice Wielder, and Hu Fen, Shapeshifter."
"Indeed,"
the judge drawled and let out a sigh of long suffering.
"Since they failed at their task, what makes you believe they are innocent?"
She squared her shoulders. The journey proved far more perilous than anticipated. They were not given sufficient forces. They are not guilty of neglect and incompetence. I was there, and I saw how outnumbered they were.
"A warrior should not need even odds to win a battle,"
the judge replied. Purple robes spilled out from where he sat, and one hand stroked the fabric aimlessly as he stared at her. Meiling had expected this, and so she carefully asked, "How many wielders are typically dispatched for a herd of Qilins?"
"I'm not answering any questions, Princess Meiling."
She kept herself from glancing left toward Shang and Fen, refused to twist her sash. Instead, she reached into her core, deep into that place where she'd discovered a fiery will. 2 or 3 wielders are typically dispatched per Qilin. The judge merely stared at her. She stared right back. Tang Shangdi and Hu Fen faced an entire herd of Qilins by themselves. Not only did they survive, but they protected me. I was unhurt. Does this not prove their competence?
"I answer no questions,"
he repeated impatiently. Meiling gritted her teeth. She gripped the edge of her sleeves in her fists. "In the entire journey, not once was I injured. Though we were attacked by Moagui and brigands," her voice was interrupted by scuttling overhead. Her head shot upward at the sound, but no one else flinched. Had no one else heard? "Get out of here, Tsadong!" she growled in her mind as hair raised on the back of her neck. If she didn't know better, she might have thought something had crawled up her spine. "Though we were attacked," she repeated, "I was never hurt. Tang Shangdi and Hu Fen suffered injuries themselves, but never me. They protected me with their lives."
"Until the brigands cornered them. Then they bartered away the princess for their lives."
The judge spoke like they were addressing some other princess. How, perhaps, but not Meiling standing before him. More scuttling. It was closer this time. She tried to arch her neck to find it, but her vision started growing blurry around the edges.
Princess Meiling,
the judge snapped. She wheeled her head up to him, realizing belatedly that her mouth hung open stupidly.
Tang Shangdi and Hufen did not protect you in the end.
A sharp pain in her mind made her wince, but she croaked, "That was not what happened."
Stop mumbling.
"That was not what happened," Meiling repeated louder, but more pain stabbed her head. Her stomach turned queasy, and she swallowed against the sudden rising nausea. Her knees almost buckled, but she forced them straight.
Then enlighten us on what happened.
What happened? She breathed through clenched teeth against the pounding in her head, lifted her eyes to the impatient judge. She clamped her gaping mouth shut and opened it again.
When the brigands attacked and you were kidnapped.
At the word brigands, even sharper pain knifed through her brain. She barely kept herself from clutching her head and crying out. She gasped for air. Not caring how unladylike the gesture was, she reached up and wiped her brow with her sleeve. It came back sopping. All she could manage around the pain was, "That wasn't what happened."
You were not kidnapped.
The world was spinning. "I was kidnapped, yes," Meiling forced out.
By whom?
"By..." She tried. She swallowed. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it. But Feng Serong's name, though it wrestled on the tip of her tongue, refused to pass through her lips. She squeezed her eyes shut, tried to force the syllables between her teeth. She couldn't. And then a voice filled her mind with a raspy chuckle.
I cannot have you betraying me now, can I? Perhaps it is beneath me, but I cannot help my interest in this handsome Tang Shangdi, this wielder who swept you away from me. You know me, my little Meiling, and how hard it is for me to forgive. Be sure that when I come, I have a special death reserved for him. But I couldn't allow him to die a hero, now could I?
Somehow, amid the muddling confusion and dagger-like pain, Meiling found the clarity to respond. "You intervened in this to ruin his reputation before you take his life? What about Finn? She's done nothing to you."
I didn't ask for her to be tried with him,
Serong drawled back. Why can't I breathe?"
Probably because you're dramatic.
The voice vanished into dark chuckles, and Meiling's eyes flew wide. She was standing in the courtroom, everyone staring at her with mingled confusion, concern, and predatory interest. Her legs wobbled again, but she stayed upright. Enough to stare blankly at those around her. At Shang's opened mouth and wide eyes.
Princess Meiling! Princess Meiling! Princess Meiling!
More pain launched into her mind, tying her tongue and closing her throat. And then, to her befuddled horror, her legs moved of their own accord. She turned around and, with a final attack of pain that almost ripped a cry from her mute mouth, she strode out of the room. No. Behind her, the judge still called after her. Disrespectful she was, irreverent, cursed by the fathers, destined for nothing. She was never allowed back into his court so long as he lived. Meiling hardly heard his words. The doors closed behind her and her entourage, sealing them off forever. Though her legs kept moving and she could not speak, her tears flowed. They streamed down her cheeks in desperate fury and helplessness. Cursed. She was cursed. Like Fei Yan, like Liu Xian. She had thought because Shang's kisses hadn't removed Serong's voice from her mind that she hadn't been cursed. and perhaps she hadn't been before he kissed her. Perhaps Sarong had implanted the curse after the kiss. It didn't matter. She was cursed now. It finally released its agonizing hold on her when her own door closed behind her and shut her into her own quarters. Her tongue loosed and she cried out, "I hate you, Fong Zidong! I hate you! I hate you! I hate you!" She stalked to her bed and, flinging aside the quilt, practically flung herself down on the firm surface. Tears streamed relentlessly as she pulled the vial Shang had given her from her sleeve and stuck a drop into her mouth. She fell into a deep sleep. Chapter 31. Meiling stood in a long corridor. At one end, it branched off into other corridors, heading further into the dream. At the other end was a huge oval stained glass window. Rose, emerald, sapphire, and silver poured through its sun-glowing panes onto the red-trimmed rug running the length of the corridor. Before her, flanked by life-sized statues of blazing phoenixes, she faced a polished staircase. The colors were more vivid, more dazzling than the real palace. She might be dazed if this were not her own mind. "Tell me, Fong Zidong, where you are hiding your curse." Laughter spilled from behind the stained glass window, and the colors pooling on the floor momentarily flickered. Like something large and dark blocked the sunlight on the other side. Meiling stilled, watching the jewel tones return. Her gaze darted down to both ends of the hallway. Listening. Feeling. Resolve hardened like steel in her heart. She stepped toward the staircase. It climbed high, spilling out into a U to another floor of the palace. Glancing down, she found she wore only her nightgown. Her feet were bare. Her hair hung long and free to her hips, its gentle waves cascading like a waterfall over her shoulders and down her back. She lifted a foot and planted it on the lowest stair. Chill flooded into her skin, and she jolted. Then she set her gaze and flew up the stairs. When she reached the top, she froze. Back in her sleeping body, her heart lurched. She moved again, but deathly slowly. She closed her eyes again, sending her awareness out and ignoring the cobwebbing memory threads surrounding her. Footsteps. Above her. That stride was so familiar. Oh no. Oh, dragon-spitting no. Her projection of her body shuddered with dread, but she increased her speed. Down the hall that curved around the staircase, she padded near silently toward another looming staircase. This one was dark. It was as though the candles in this part of the palace had not been lit, and the staircase itself was shrouded in darkness. Only thin slivers of silvery light cast across random stairs. Swallowing the fear that lumped in her throat, she did not slacken her pace toward that staircase. The palace around her grew darker, and when she stepped on the first stair, it was like stepping into another world altogether. A world wreathed in night. Circular windows lined the wall along the curving, winding staircase. Meiling looked out the lowest one, and her blood ran cold. A full moon, big and liquid and almost painfully bright, showered moonlight through the glass. But when she looked down at the stairs, only threads of silver reflected back at her, as though the moon was only the barest crescent. She swallowed again, tearing her eyes away from the windows. The next stair groaned under her weight. She shouldn't weigh anything here. Even losing the projection of her feet and flying up the stairs resulted in the same creaking and groaning as she passed over each stair. She'd hoped to have the element of surprise, but now... Despite herself, she slowed. Her lungs tightened, her muscles bracing. She almost called up into the night-bound staircase to whom, she knew waited at the top. But she pursed her lips shut and continued. Each inch, each stair, was agony. The softest kiss of wind met her at the top of the staircase. It ruffled her nightdress, her hair. There, wreathed in an icy blue glow and emanating strength from his wide-braced legs, was Shang. He tilted his head, black eyes reflecting blue. His arms were crossed, and his face was serious. Hardly a shred of emotion. Meiling lifted her chin and growled, "I never let you into my mind." The stoic mask melted away at once, revealing a softened mouth, gentle brows, and an earnest gaze.
I love you, Meiling.
The declaration hit her just as hard as the first time. She grabbed hold of the cool, polished banister for support, but before she could insist that her mind belonged only to her, Shang had crossed the distance between them and drawn her into his arms. His lips found hers, the only part of him that was soft. And just like that, she didn't care how he'd ended up in her mind, didn't care that she wasn't sure he was even real. She'd craved his kisses like a starving man for sustenance. When she tilted her mouth to his, he responded immediately, tightening his grip on her and making 100 promises with his lips that could never be fulfilled. He broke the kiss first, but didn't pull away as he whispered,
"You're cursed. We should hunt for it together."
Silvery moonlight caught in his eyes. They glittered, strong enough that she was forced to meet them. And she knew. She knew he wasn't real. Knew she hadn't let him into her mind. Really, she'd known the moment she saw him. She just hadn't wanted to believe it. She worked her hands up to his chest and pushed. His grip tightened. "Let me go." He caught her chin, tilted her face up to his, as though studying her closely. If he bent down and kissed her again, she'd let him, even though she knew he wasn't real. She'd believe this fantasy simply because she wanted to. He seemed to know it too. He withdrew his arms from around her and took off into the darkness.
"I think the curse is this way. I sensed it when I arrived."
He expected her to follow, and she wouldn't have, except that she knew he was right. After all, she hadn't created this midnight wing in the palace of her mind. She frowned, stepping slowly after him. Not wanting to lose him in the darkness, she gritted her teeth and walked faster. She followed him into a doorway and peered up warily at the hanging, splintered wood lintel. Each step raised her hackles more, but he never turned around to ensure she was following him.
"Watch your step,"
he called over his shoulder. When Meiling looked down, she did a double take and then crouched to get a clearer view in the dimness. Moonlight reflected on the floor in little pools of silver. "Is this broken glass?"
"Yes."
She willed away her bare feet and floated over the scattered shards. Frowned again. She wanted to close her eyes, to try to sense what was nearby, to reach out for any hint of the curse. Shang disappeared around a bend ahead. Her heart slammed into her chest with a burst of fear. She hurried forward, but as she did so, her foot brushed something soft. She paused, biting her tongue, but she kneeled to see what was scattered across this length of rough floorboards. She reached down and lifted up a handful of little flowers? They were waxy between her pinched fingers, and the sweet fragrance filled her nostrils. Winter sweet blossoms. Her mind returned to that candlelit dance in the pavilion, with Shang's eyes on her. She did not need light to know these blossoms were yellow, tinged with a flush of maroon at the center. One hand braced against the floor near her knee, the other holding the wintersweet. The blood drained from her face. An exhale escaped her lips. Not daring to say the words aloud, she cursed herself inwardly. Stupid idiot girl. She knew who awaited her around that bend, and it definitely wasn't Shang. She fisted her palm and knocked it into her forehead. Honestly, she was growing quite exhausted from being baited by him. Summoning her courage and feeling far more alone than she had a moment before, She stood and clutched the fistful of blossoms to her chest. Curse or no curse, this was her mind. She stepped around the bend and stopped. It was a small room, mostly empty save for a cushion lying in front of huge open windows. The curtains wafted with the same breeze that now tugged at her hair, her nightdress. Through the windows, moonlight washed like snow onto that mat, and the man seated on it. Fong Tsedong smiled. "You are a liar," Meiling seethed. That smile tipped further, and he cocked his head, just like Shang had done moments ago.
"How else would I get you to come here, little one?"
"I'm not a dog," she spat. "I followed the curse." He gave a full grin now, spreading his arms behind his head and staring with satisfaction at her.
"Your mind is a beautiful place,"
he said, and swept one hand toward the darkened room.
"I had to make this part of it a little more livable. For me, you see. All that sunlight and those garishly blinding colors. Really, Meiling, I'd have thought your preferences a little more subdued."
"What have you done to my mind?" He shook his head, lifting one eyebrow.
"Your boldness exceeds that of a lion in your own mind. Tell me, why do you hide it around others, sweet one? Is it because they sweep you under the rug? Tell you that you're unimportant? Just a princess to be stuffed into a library and hidden away?"
He shifted forward, planting his elbows on his legs and setting his chin on his hands.
I know they hurt you, made you into this helpless mess."
He waved his hand.
"Unable to save your friends.
That was thanks to you.
And unable to hold your own against the people who hurt you."
Stop manipulating me. I'm tired of it. Get your mat, your broken glass, your midnight, and yourself, and get out of my mind." He grinned.
"How much more fun you are, sweet Meiling, when you are not as sweet as you pretend to be in the waking world. I'd spar with you all day if I didn't have more important things to do."
That was what Shang had called her once. Sweet Meiling. She crossed her arms over her chest, shooting her most potent glare. "If you have so many important things to do, then why do you bother? Why do you bother with me, with Shang, with Fen, with Fei Yan? Why did you send Liu Xian to kill me? Why don't you focus on conquering Zhenning Hai instead of tormenting me?"
Ah, now that is the sort of question I love getting. One I'm delighted to answer.
She tapped her foot, still glaring.
"You tell me, little one, or what does Liana call you, my dove? What is more effective revenge for her marrying that prince and bearing his brats than breaking her most cherished darling?"
"If you love her, you will not try to hurt her." The light shifted in Tsedong's eyes. They grew bluer, dilated, focused.
"You know I am not a forgiving person."
"Love forgives."
"Love is blind,"
he returned evenly.
"And stupid. Did I tell you I love Liana? Do you think I love her?"
"Why did you want to make me your princess?"
"Because I pitied you,"
he said with a piercing grin.
"Because if you were to be my princess, I would have to successfully turn you against your family. Liana gave you powerlessness. I offered you power. I wanted Liana to see you choose me over her."
Meiling drove down her nausea. She braced her legs wider to keep her balance secure, to keep herself from toppling over. "Why are you telling me this?" He lifted an eyebrow and leaned back on his mat. His eyes seemed to take on a light of their own.
"Because I see your mind now, and you do not want power. Not one shred of it. You want your people. You'd be their slave. You'd crawl on your hands and knees. You'd debase yourself. You'd humiliate yourself to dust for the people you love.
His smile shifted into a scowl, dark and hateful.
Forgive me if I'm not as interested in having you as my princess as before.
He was always tall, but when he stood, he was tall enough that his tight braids nearly brushed the ceiling. He assumed a casual stance, but his muscles seemed to twitch, ready to pounce. She faced him.
Now you tell me,
Tserong purred.
What would you give, little one, to save your loved ones?
It seems like you already know the answer, Meiling replied. He strode closer to her, close enough to reach out and stroke the hair back from her forehead, making her flinch.
The power I was going to give you would have been enough to save them. You could have blocked my curse, the second one, the one I replanted after last night's kissing escapade. You could have stopped Lucienne from stabbing you, overcome that fox spirit's mind, punished the judge for not listening to you, forced your parents to do as you say instead of constantly limiting your potential. So much, Meiling, I could have given you. It is unfortunate that you will not be my heir.
You made Shang and Fen lie in their own trial, didn't you? Meiling demanded, fury making her step closer, caring little if it put her at risk. You cursed them too! You've cursed everyone in this father's forsaken palace! Tserong's eyebrows arose, and genuine merriment crinkled the skin near his lashes.
The conclusions you're jumping to are both fascinating and flattering. But really, I'd have thought by now that you would know I am not a brutal force sort of man. I could curse everyone in this palace. It would take a while, yes, and use up quite a lot of spell resources. What would I gain from that, however? Little more than what I would gain from a few targeted curses and compulsions.
Shang was cursed. Fen was cursed. If Meiling didn't... As though hearing her thoughts, perhaps he did hear her thoughts, his smile widened. It was almost pitying.
Your dear friends aren't cursed. Not yet, at least. It was only a temporary compulsion, like what I said on Du Lucienne. This is the power of Wung Fao. A force that does your bidding, that goes into the world at your behest. Have you seen magic capable of this? No, little girl, you have not.
What has it cost you? Meiling asked, lifting her chin. To become the only person in the world to master black magic. Tserong's attention narrowed.
Nothing I haven't given up willingly.
Then you didn't have anything of true worth.
True. His smile sharpened. The good I had was taken from me, but I will take her back, and I will be forced to break you, little dove, to show her that she should not have chosen power over promise.
He slinked closer to her until she stiffened. He tilted his face down to hers, his rough voice becoming something low, melodic, and terrifyingly composed.
I'll kill your family, your friends, but I will spare you and her until the end. I will make Liena watch you grieve the man you love, your siblings, your father, because nothing will hurt her more than seeing you suffering soul-deep pain.
Get out of my mind, Meiling breathed around the tightness of her lungs. Leave my mind and stay away from my family. She could hear the crinkling edges of his smile.
You are so like her. Nearly 25 years it has been. I've missed her. Speaking with you reminds me what it was like to kiss your mother.
He caught her flying fist before it connected with his face. Get out! Meiling snarled, baring her teeth. He studied her, holding her wrist captive, clearly reading her intention in her face to hit him with her other fist. Something unexpected flashed in his gaze, and it was almost like he saw something different in her. A part of her that wasn't like her mother. A part of her that was wholly Meiling.
Very well,
He said at last, with the long-suffering sigh of a martyr. He released her wrist, and she barely maintained her self-control to not attempt to hit him again.
I shall indulge you one last time. Come here, and I will kiss you.
I'm not kissing you, she snapped, already tensing. You can leave my mind without it.
My curse is too deep, sweet Meiling, for me to simply call it away. Come, I'll only kiss your forehead.
She stared up at his towering form in the darkness and gritted her teeth. You're not going to leave.
Indeed, I shall.
Why? He reached out and grabbed her face with both hands, like Shang had done last night, and drew her closer, ignoring her protests and twisting to get out of his grip.
Let's say I have more important things to attend to.
With that, he pressed his scalding lips against her brow. She screamed.
Chapter 32. Shang didn't hear much else in the trial after Meiling left. He nearly threw caution to the wind and ran after her. Something was wrong. Desperately wrong. All he could think of was Fei Yan lying unconscious in the shrubbery last night. Meiling must be cursed too. Either that or suddenly very ill. He needed to get to her and make sure she was all right. The end of the trial came upon him suddenly. "Verdict will be announced tomorrow," the judge said irritably, not even looking at them. Shang's focus snapped into place, and he didn't need to be a master at reading people's faces to know as well as he knew his own name what the verdict would be. They'd lost. When Meiling had walked, when she'd first begun presenting his case, Shang had let himself hope. Now he just looked at Fen, at the ashen pallor of her skin, and couldn't help but feel a fool for thinking this case's outcome wasn't set from the beginning. Shang bowed wordlessly to the judge and strode out of the courtroom with Fen on his heels. "We're dead," she said once the doors had closed behind them, as though she couldn't believe it. "We're not dead yet," Shang growled. He spun to face her, making her stop abruptly as he pinned her with his gaze. "Did you decide? About the Emperor's offer?" Fen's attention fled away as she chewed the inside of her cheek. A muscle flexed in her neck, a vein standing out on her forehead, her hands fisted, and the words nearly killed her, but she got them out. "I will go." A sigh of relief gushed out of Shang's chest. He squeezed her shoulder, and then he was marching away as fast as he could, needing to get to Meiling. "At least one of the people I care about won't die." He received strange looks from guards and servants the closer he got to Meiling's quarters, where he had no business being. It didn't deter him from striding right up to her door and facing her guards. "I must speak to the princess. She is getting ready for the celebration tonight and must not be disturbed." Getting ready for the celebration? Then maybe she was all right? With her magic, perhaps she dealt with any issues on her own? Shang swallowed, nodding toward the door. "How is she?" The guard looked at him, frowning. "I beg your pardon? Is the princess all right?" Suspicion twisted the guard's expression. "Is she ill?" Shang demanded, fighting to control his tone. "I saw her not long ago, and she wasn't feeling well." "She had a headache, but she has rested and is preparing for tonight. Now, if you please, you must leave. She isn't to be disturbed." "But you are sure she is well?" The guard leveled a fierce glare at him. Then, to Shang's surprise, he knocked on Meiling's door. At a quiet beckoning, he opened it a crack and asked, Highness, are you well? Meiling's surprised voice called back.
Well? Oh, yes, I am quite well, thank you. Is something the matter?
Shang closed his eyes as a relieved sigh escaped him. After responding that nothing was wrong, the guard pulled the door shut and with an arched, "I told you so" look, beckoned Shang to leave. Shang wanted specifics. Was she fine physically, but was she trapped in a curse? Did she need help? But this seemed to be all he was going to get. It would have to be enough for now. Meiling was fine. At least fine enough to get ready and attend the celebration. He would see her shortly then and confirm she was all right. Until then, he also needed to dress for the celebration.
The curse was gone, and so was her chance to save Shang and Fen. Meiling stood, elbows propped up on the windowsill, staring out her window at the declining sun. Her maids awaited her call outside, but she couldn't tolerate them right now. Even if the grandest, largest feast concluding the Festival of New Lights was starting soon, and she had not even begun dressing for it. She couldn't even cry. She could only stare, could only feel a growing sense of gnawing emptiness in her chest, her belly. Failure burned. What was there left to do? The trial was over. She could not present any more information. If the judge truly believed Shang and Fen had bartered her life in exchange for their own, which was utterly idiotic to even consider, then what good Meiling did for their case was nothing. Not against that mountain of fault. Only a few months ago, Shang and Fen were the Academy's top graduates, about to step into their bright futures and illustrious destinies. Now, Meiling bowed her head.
What would you give to save your loved ones?
Anything. Everything. But everything wasn't enough. Meiling beckoned her maids in and did not even try to lift her countenance for them. She sat mutely while they fixed her hair, paint, and pinned unnecessary baubles and accessories to her person. All this time, from the moment she'd returned home, Tserong had been here. He had sent his magic to devour her, to prepare this place for his invasion. If she had recognized it sooner, if she'd recognized that scuttling as belonging to Tserong's black magic. She shook her head and pressed her palm over her face, closing her eyes even as her maids clucked about must paint. Maybe she was the only one to see and hear the infiltrating magic because she had held, touched, wielded black magic while she was a prisoner in Tserong's fortress. Not even Shang had been able to detect it. She'd tell her parents about the magic, but she was certain they would tell her to stop getting involved, as if it was her choice to be hounded and terrorized by their enemy. They would be sent into a frenzy of worrying and ensuring she was protected and safe. But her blood would not be the first to flow. Tonight, she would speak with Shang, apologize for everything and beg his forgiveness, and then tell him all she knew. He would get the information into the right hands. If he did not attend the feast, she would do whatever it took to lose her guards and find him, or she'd use her mind magic to speak to him. She swallowed at her reflection and spared half a thought that she looked nothing like that girl who had been escorted out the west gate by two strangers all those months ago.